Jackie, there'll be plans for...
Would you attention, please? We're having here today, and I would like to thank them for attending this gala, the 6th anniversary of the 1920 strike, when Arthur James Cook's probably addressed in this particular park. I'd like to thank the Royal Colliery Band, the Durham Colliery Mechanics, the Langley Park Colliery Band, the Mount Weymouth Colliery Band, and the Durham County Brass Band League, who are present today. The Mass Band will now play Gresford.
Yeah, the bass will be carrying through the end of the first.
Thank you, Van Master. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the 60th anniversary of the Burnhope Gala. 60 years ago, a man by the name of Arthur James Cook was proud to say on my right here. He was the man that left the Durham Gala. Now, since that period of time, the union has went through a traumatic bloody history regarding the struggles, etc. Now, the last General Secretary that spoke of this, as I said, was Arthur James Cook. Though here, the man you've come to all listen to is Arthur Scargill, the president of the National Union of Minemakers. This original gala was organised by the name of Jim Hobbs, who was secretary at that particular time. Unfortunately, the miners went back defeated. But this time, even though it was a long bit of struggle, they did not go back defeated. There may be a few odds and sods who didn't toe the line, but we'll treat them with the contempt they bloody well deserve. There has been 3 great strikes in the history of this union. 1831 under the leadership of Tommy Hepburn, and that lasted to 12 months. The next big strike of any significance was the 1926 strike. And here, it was a matter of hours and pay. We were fighting for jobs this time. And the National Union was fighting for jobs. In 1984 and 85 strike. And as this, when I look back and I say, and this morning we went to my man's grave, Tommy Armstrong, a poet and songwriter. We paid tribute to him, erected a headstone to his memory. And it's a remarkable thing that in the strike, with the women's support groups, the artists, various sections of the working class who shown that talent which, if harnessed, we could really show the other side what can we really do. Now, the first person I'm going to ask to speak this morning is a man called by the name of Jeremy Corbyn, to address you. And anyhow, as I say, I'd like to thank you very much for attending this gala and making it a success. In fact, I think this is just as good as a big meeting. Well, unfortunately, Jeremy's been delayed. But anyhow, here's a man you've all come to listen. We had the fire brigade this morning. I think it was there for to dampen any fairy speeches Arthur might make. Arthur Scargill.
Mr. Chairman and colleagues, first of all, let me bring on behalf of the NEC the warm fraternal greetings to all miners, their families, members of the support groups and friends in this part of the North East. Now, I don't know who organised the official reception this morning, but I reckon that they must have had a warped sense of humour. Following a week of intense news bulletins about Thatcher's right hand and little finger curling inside, apparently, I got this telephone call that members of the Durham NUM would meet me at the Thatcher's Foot Club. I don't know whether a curling hand and a Thatcher's foot are any indication to you, but the indication to me, and I'm sure to the majority of people in Britain, is that come the next election, Thatcher will have to walk out at number 10 and a Labour government will be elected. It's 60 years ago since this gala was first addressed by the legendary AJ Cook, a man who led the British miners in what until 1984 was the most historic industrial dispute ever seen anywhere in the world. He, unlike me, was not liked by the media. He was the butt of the cartoonist jibe. He was subjected to every vilification, smear and innuendo ever put out by organised newspapers and radio of the time. And yet Cook, in 1926, displayed a quality that many in our movement who have since received knighthoods, baronesses and earldoms could never display if they lived to be 1,000. He displayed dedication, loyalty and commitment to his class and to his union, and for that all of us should applaud the memory of Arthur James Cook. It's of course a tribute that this gala in a village can attract so many people to listen to speeches dealing with the current situation. And what a situation! We've got 4.5 million people without a job. And Thatcher and that undertaker of hers, Tevitt, keep telling us that we're in a healthy state. Who the hell are they talking about when they say we're in a healthy state? I'll tell you who they're talking about? They're talking about their class. And if you wanted a vivid description, you had it during the course of the last 7 days. The obscenity of this government trying to mount an argument in support of an obscene regime in South Africa. I noticed that Thatcher has no compunction about establishing boycotts when it's the Moscow Olympics, no compunction about establishing boycotts when it's against Libya, but when it's against South Africa and her pals are earning money out of the backs of the black people, then she's every consideration for the Botha regime. But I say to our colleagues in the Labour Party, as a member of 25 years, I believe as an active member I'm entitled to say it, that if we'd done the job that we should have done, there wouldn't have been any trade with South Africa. Even in 1979, we'd have had a boycott then, displaying solidarity. Not only have we got 4.5 million unemployed, not only are foreign relations collapsing around their ears, but the economy as a whole is in one hell of a mess. Living standards are at the lowest level ever. And it's no good telling me that living standards for some are all right, when living standards for millions of people are now below the officially described poverty level. The Tories' philosophy is a simple one. You create a huge reservoir of unemployed, and on the other hand, you introduce anti-trade union laws to try and control effective trade unionism. There's only one response against the tactics deployed by the Tories, and it's not to try and design new legislation that will introduce ballots or any other consideration into unions. Any political party that wishes to conform to the International Labour Organization Convention should accept that trade unions must be free to determine their own policy, their own rules, their own constitutions, without government interference from any colour or any political persuasion. And of course, in this part of Durham, we can say a very clear message, not only to Thatcher, not only to the Tories who have made us suffer since 1979, but also a very clear, specific message to our own party. For God's sake, if you learn no other lesson, please learn one lesson from the Tory party. When you do become the next Labour government, treat them as ruthlessly as they've treated us. Now, we've got members of the media taking note of what I'm saying, so I'll speak rather slowly so they'll understand it. There's a lot of argument about whether or not we can do things quickly with a new Labour government. There's no problem. I can abolish unemployment overnight. I'll tell you how to do it. And just watch how much of this is on Tyne Tees and on North East. In order to get rid of unemployment, the next Labour government should introduce a 4-day working week for all people with no loss of pay. Secondly, in common with many other countries, we should ban all overtime and allow kids who are on the dole to have a job rather than languishing on the back streets. And thirdly, we should lower the retirement age so that people can retire on a decent living wage, not simply to while away their years, but in order that they can go back to university, to school and to college, in order that they can give to our young people the benefit of their knowledge and experience, and so we can all become a more creative society. I was at the unveiling ceremony this morning, the graveside of Thomas Armstrong, and as I was approaching, an intrepid reporter from one of the local radio stations asked what my comments were about the National Coal Board's announcement in relation to CM Colliery. And I asked him what his reaction was. And I'll ask these people on television and radio and in the news media what their reaction is. Because let me remind you that for 2.5 years, what I've told you, and I've told the British people, that the Coal Board and government are going to close pits, not only in the northeast but in Britain. You've told me that I'm lying. When McGregor and Thatcher are telling the truth. You have the guts now to go back on television and say you got it wrong. It's Thatcher and McGregor who've been lying throughout this period. But as far as CM's concerned, I stand exactly where I stood in March 1984, in March 1983, in March 1982, when I was elected President of this Union. I told you then, if you wanted a president who would earn a place in the House of Lords, you better pick somebody else. But if you want a president who'll carry through the policies that you pass without swerving or betraying or compromising you, then I've done my best to serve your interests and fight against the closure of CM and any other pit, and that's what I'll continue to do. Now we've got one redundancy coming up in a few weeks' time, and it will be the first redundancy that in my life I've ever supported. McGregor, I'm told he's on his way.
Hooray!
He thought he was going to get a job in the States, but apparently they don't want him. So he's buying, or he's bought, a big estate in Scotland to go trout fishing. God help the trout. I mean, what else can he say about a bloke that puts his head in a plastic bag? The only thing he ever did for Britain was to promote the sale of plastic bags during 3 years. I've worked out exactly what he cost. Not Britain's miners, but what it cost you and I and all the British taxpayers, even these police officers who served him and the Tories so well. It cost them £12 million a day. Instead of spending £12 million a day trying to destroy this union, trying to destroy this industry, surely it would have been better to have spent that money on new hospitals, schools, housing programs and creating jobs for young people who desperately need work in a society. Of course, we've been under constant attack from the Tories and also from their creation, known as the breakaway UDM, which Davison referred to. UDM. What a spectacle. Did you notice on television their conference? And then they've got the audacity to try and claim the trade unionists. The main speaker is the Tory party minister for coal. The second speaker is the chairman of the National Coal Board, Ian McGregor, who's attacked them and given them the lowest wage increase in 20 years. And the third speaker couldn't turn up, called Eric Hammond. Compare that with the speakers at our conference. The speakers at the NUM were a representative from the print workers' unions who are on strike against Murdoch and all that he stands for as he tries to destroy trade unionism in Fleet Street. We had a representative of the magnificent young workers at Silent Night who are doing everything in their power to gain their jobs back and trade union recognition. And thirdly, and most significantly of all, we didn't have a McGregor, we didn't have a Tory minister, we had two courageous black trade union miners leaders, McLartsey and Ramaphosa, speaking at our conference, displaying international solidarity. And at our conference, I'm told, not by members, but by the media, that I made a controversial speech. Well, I'll let you in on a secret in Durham. You as well.
What are you?
As long as it's not Thatcher. I'll give you a little tip. My speech at the NUM was controversial. It challenged members, but it did not ask members to do anything that I'm not prepared to do, or have done, or argue ought to be done. I say quite simply that if we're going to win, not a wage increase, but the same wage that the coal board are paying to other miners, you're going to have to take action yet again. I didn't say strike action. I didn't even define it. But I defined the fact that you'll have to take action again in order to win what is rightfully yours, an increase in pay backdated to November 1985. Now I can't, as National President, I can't possibly suggest what miners in Durham ought to do. I can't begin to suggest that because miners in South Wales have already imposed an overtime ban, that you should be considering the same, even though I know a number of you are. And I understand that similar considerations are happening in other coalfields. But I know from experience that the only thing that concentrates the mind of the National Coal Board is when miners are united and when miners are committed towards achieving a legitimate demand, in this case, a wages increase. But let me make it clear, the Coal Board are doing everything in their power to try and separate miners, divide them, split them, and foster and support as far as they can the breakaway UDM. If I'd got a word of advice for any miner who's in that breakaway outfit as to why he shouldn't be, it's because it's backed by the boss and backed by the Tories. And my father told me when I was 10 that if you ever join any industry where your union officials are supported by the boss, then change your union officials, because they're not working in the interests of you or your members or your class. Now I notice, Chairman, there's been a lot of speculation about the UDM and a lot of speculation in a newspaper called The Observer about so-called secret meetings aimed apparently at ostracising me. Well, I'm told by one of the people who was named that there was no truth in it. But secondly, in order to dispel any misunderstandings about my position, as far as the UDM is concerned, let me make it absolutely clear. Let me make it unambiguous. Let me make it so clear that even the Daily Express can understand it. We want to see every single miner back in one union, but there will not, there cannot, and there must not be ever any place for the UDM inside the ranks of the National Union of Mine Workers. Chairman, it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a battle ahead of us. But it's a struggle that all of us have got to face against the background of increased energy demand. Now is the time to begin to put forward forcefully our demands. If anyone in this country wanted a lesson, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in Russia ought to have provided it. Nuclear power represents a threat to every single man, woman and child, not only in Britain, but throughout Europe and the world. And it's the height of stupidity to continue with a nuclear program that contaminates our sea and our land and our air. We should stop nuclear power now and begin to develop alternative energy resources. But above all, we should begin to build new coal-fired power stations. We should also begin to put forward our program as far as the industry is concerned. And as recently as this week, I've been in discussions with Stanholm about what a new plan for coal ought to contain. And I'll tell you where we stand as a union. Our demands have gone up as a result of what the Tories have done in the past few years. First of all, there must be no more pit closures other than on the grounds of exhaustion or safety. Secondly, and equally important, and let there be no misunderstanding about this, those pits that have closed with substantial reserves of coal have got to be reopened, and reopened as quickly as possible. And thirdly, we want at least 40, yes, 40 new pits in order to provide both replacement and additional capacity as we go towards the 21st century. We want to see a developing and expanding coal industry, but we also want to see a developing and expanding workforce, not a contracting workforce in the mining industry. It's no good telling me we've got good new technology if at the same time 5,000 miners are told they're going to face the dole queue. This crackpot who interviewed me today said the coal board said there's going to be no redundancy. I said, what about the young lads and lasses who would have had a job if they didn't close pits down? Of course there's going to be redundancy. It's redundancy for our kids we're talking about, and we should say we're not prepared to have it, and we want an expansion program to provide job opportunities for all of them inside a sensible, coordinated energy plan. And I hope the Labour Party and TUC this year not only reaffirm their opposition to nuclear power, but reaffirm their commitment to the coal mining industry. But we should go further. We should widen our horizons, and we should argue for the 4-day working week, not with the same hours or longer hours, but with the same hours promised by the Sankey Commission in 1919. We should argue for a technology agreement that means no redundancy for our people, but shorter working periods, more sabbaticals, and in order that the fruits of technology become the fruits of the workforce in the industry, as well as resulting in a cheaper product at the end of the day. We should also argue for better holidays in line with other industries and anti-social shift payments that at least match those in other industries. It's surely high time that the miserable amount we get should be increased to something like time and a third, as applies in other industries in 1986. There are those, incidentally, who argue that the miners' strike in 1984-5 was a defeat. Well, I'm not one of them. I do not believe anybody with a sense of history or basic understanding can do any other than recognise the magnificent achievement of the miners' strike. Look around you. Look at the magnificent women's support groups. Look at the support groups all over Britain and Europe. That was no setback. That was no defeat. That was an achievement for the working class movement of Britain. We should also broaden our horizons in an international sense. We should be talking in a positive fashion about world peace, because without peace, none of our programme of demands is meaningful at all. Our Labour government, when it comes to power, should have no equivocation about introducing unilateral nuclear disarmament and at the same time getting out of NATO in order to protect our people, men, women and children, from the threat of a nuclear holocaust. What a stupid world we live in. What a crazy mixed up world. Well, on the one hand, we've got kids dying of starvation in Ethiopia, and on the other hand, we've got butter mountains and beef mountains and grain mills stacked to the full. Surely we can give one to the other in order that world peace and world humanity can go hand in hand. But more important, in this mad world, why don't we argue to stop the nuclear program and use the money for kidney machines, for heart machines, and to eradicate completely waiting lists for hospitals, provide home health care for the aged? Surely that's common sense. There will be those who say Scargill is a dreamer when he talks in terms of socialism, of peace and a better world. Well, if that's being a dreamer, then thank God I belong in that mould. But socialism is not something that's unobtainable. Socialism is here. It's a living thing. I'll tell you what socialism is. Socialism, you can see day by day when the school children go to school and the school teachers give assistance not because of the money they get, but because of the care and the dedication to the kids. You can see socialism when you go into a hospital and you see nurses and doctors desperately fighting to save a person's life, giving the best possible care. They're not thinking about the money. They're thinking about saving human lives. That's socialism at work with human beings. I remember a solitary lesson that I had some 2 years ago. I was in Scotland and I had done 32 meetings in 2.5 days, and that's going a bit even for me. And I was asked by the organisers in the Labour Party if I would go to a small village to meet a local councillor who desperately wanted to see me but couldn't get into the main town to see me. I didn't really want to go because I was pretty tired. But out of a sense of duty, I decided, all right, I'll go. I went out to this small village at 9:30 that Sunday morning. And on this street corner, there was a little old woman, about 70 years of age. She was dressed in a pair of carpet slippers and an oldish coat. And she came forward and said, "Mr. Scargill, I'm so pleased to meet you. I really am proud to be able to shake your hand, sir. I'm so pleased that you could find a few minutes just to come to my village and have a look. You see, we're not a big town." She says, "We're not a massive area, but we try." And she says, "You know, in spite of all the Tories' policy decisions, we've been able to do things. Can I just show you for a few seconds what I've done?" And I said, "Yes." And she took me down the street and she showed me this marvellous centre. She says, "You see that, lad? That's our community centre. It's magnificent. It's built," she says, "so that all the people in the village have got a central point where they can come together." But she said, "You see, all too often in our society, we forget those who are less able to contribute or participate as we are. And therefore," she said, "we built a special section, not a part, but part of the centre for the physically handicapped people in our village. And this magnificent specially equipped centre had got every conceivable facility for the severely disabled." And she said, "You know, lad, there's also another problem we face. All too often," she said, "those who are mentally handicapped, we tend to push to one side or forget or ignore. Well, in my village," she said, "we don't do that. We've built a section here so that they too can fully participate, so that we become a real community." And I looked at this woman, who by this time I'd spent 2 hours with, and I began to feel humble. I began to feel really humbled indeed in the presence of this magnificent young person who, through her life, to the time when she became an old age pensioner, had fought to establish these facilities. She'd suddenly grown from a tiny old woman to a giant. But I'll tell you what she was telling me. She wasn't talking about a centre. She was talking about practicing socialism, not preaching it. And that's a lesson for every single socialist and every single member of the Labour movement. There is in this crowd, Mr. Chairman, a survivor of the meeting in this park 60 years ago. A man who met and knew AJ Cook. A man who was a member of the branch committee. A man who's lived through the period to which I've related. He knows more than anybody else the kind of historical context in which I've been speaking. Today, I too have suffered the kind of vilification that AJ Cook suffered, and he was the first to acknowledge it as I spoke to him before I came on this platform. But I know that every single time they attack, they're doing the best service in the world, because it reminds me I'm doing the job for which I was elected by the membership of the NUM. I want to say that I want to pay a special tribute to the miners of this area, to the members of the magnificent women's support groups who've really earned a full place as full members of the NUM. I want to pay tribute to those in the wider community who gave help. It's now our turn not only to fight for our own industry, not only to fight for better wages, not only to fight for the current wage round, but to assist our brothers and sisters in other industries like the print industry at Wapping. And I would urge every single person to go on those demonstrations and show solidarity and support with printers who've been sacked simply for daring to challenge Murdoch's right to tell them what terms and conditions they will have unilaterally. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, let me say this. There are many times during the course of my life as a trade union official that I often wonder how difficult the struggle really is. And like any other human being, I often ask the question, how much longer does it have to go on before it gets better? But if ever there is a flicker, if ever there is a moment of doubt, hesitation or question, all I have to do is to pick out a volume of the history of the miners and to read about the struggles of men like our colleague from 1926 who built this union when to be a member of a union meant the sack from the pit, to read of struggles to establish the right of women to vote, to read of the struggles of those who built the British Labour and Trade Union movement. And I know in an instant that the struggle that we have is infinitesimal compared with theirs. We should take heart from what they did. We should rededicate ourselves today. We should honour the memory of people like AJ Cook and our colleague who was with him on this platform. And above all, we should commit ourselves to a better world, to a socialist Britain, to a Labour government, but in the final analysis, to a world freed from nuclear war, so that our children can build a kind of society that all of us desperately want to see. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'd like to thank you very much, Arthur, for that inspiring speech and a historical lesson. I think we've learned a lesson from this. Not only did we learn a lesson in the 1984-85 strike, but we should learn a lesson this morning. And I would like to apologise to our guests on the platform here this morning, i.e. Mark Hughes, Annie Armstrong, Hilary Armstrong, next MP.
Thank you very much. I think there's something wrong with the timing that if I'm